Please note that this episode contains tales of loss and grief that some people may find disturbing. If you want to avoid this content, skip this episode and see you in the next one. Thank you. Hello, elephants in the room, and welcome to the second series of the European University Institute Equity, Diversity and Inclusion podcast, where we explore how different factors such as gender and gender identity, sex, race, ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, religion or belief, disability, weight, and other characteristics affect every part of our society, from our places of work to politics, from culture to history, food, and everything in between. We will also reflect together with our guests on the intersectionality of these factors, both within the same under-recognized groups presenting these characteristics and in the wider society. This podcast makes all of us part of the conversation because we are all part of the story. My name is Giuseppe Zago and I'm the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the EDI. Today, Christina Pasanikolaki, the EDI Trainee and recent graduated in psychology, will join me in a discussion with our guest Gemma Fenton, a psychologist at the EDI who is part of the Psychological Support and Wellbeing service. We will discuss together mental health awareness and how the way we talk or approach mental health have an impact on our well-being and health at work and in doing research. Today we're recording just a few days before the 10th of October, which marks World Mental Health Day. This is an important day whose objective is to raise awareness of mental health issues around the world and to mobilize efforts in support of mental health. And this year's theme is particularly appropriate for this episode because it's about mental health at work. And it's meant to highlight the vital connection between mental health and work, particularly thinking about safe, healthy working environments and how they can act as a protective factor for mental health. But at the same time, they can also lead to unhealthy conditions, including stigma, discrimination, and exposures to risks like harassment or other poor working conditions, and pose significant risks that can affect mental health, as well as quality of life, and also, as a consequence, our participation at work and in research. So, Gemma, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Giuseppe.
Thank you for being here, and welcome, Christina.
Hi, thank you, Gemma, for today.
So, Gemma, maybe before going into all the questions, we want to address today, you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional background.
Okay, thank you, Giuseppe. So I studied psychology at the University of Rome, and whilst I was studying psychology, I had the privilege of working with the Romani in and around Rome. And that was a real privilege because I learnt so much from meeting a culture that you don't often get to meet in such depth, and has certainly shaped the way that I see mental health, how it's perceived in society, and how people perceive their own mental health as well. And also, I think it's shaped the way that I perceive stigma, and how important it is to break down barriers of not knowing between people. So after working and studying in Rome, I moved to the UK, where I worked with children and adolescents with autism, learning disabilities and challenging behaviour. And from there, I moved to working in child and adolescent mental health on the Isle of Wight, and then I came here. So I've had quite a varied working background before coming to the EUI, and I've had the privilege of working with lots of different people. Each time I start working with a new population of people, I get quite frightened, and I imagine that it's quite similar to the process of research. When you're starting a new research topic, you always think that you're not going to be good enough at doing it, and that people will think that you're an imposter and that you don't know what you're talking about, and gradually breaking through those fears and understanding that people are people wherever they are has been really helpful over the course of time. So whilst when I joined the EUI, it was quite daunting to be working with such a different population of people compared to working with child and adolescents on the Isle of Wight and their families and their teachers and social workers, etc., etc. It was a very exciting prospect to have.
This is very, very interesting, and I think it shows really well how psychology actually reflects real life all the way through. You cannot really disconnect it from what's actually happening to real people and populations with different characteristics and issues. So going into mental health awareness, which is our topic for today, usually when we talk about physical health, most of us know what we're talking about, but mental health is something that usually people don't really know how to define. For example, we talk about mental health when we talk about people who live with mental health disorders, but at the same time, someone could say that they're doing a massage treatment for their mental health. So these people might mean completely different things by the term mental health. So how would you, as a professional, define it? And how is that definition different from what we can hear in an everyday conversation?
Thank you, Christina. I would say that mental health is a bit of a construct, yeah. Lots of things play in to our mental health on a daily basis. It's something that shifts as we move through time. It's not a static concept. So I was thinking about this question on Saturday morning, and I woke up on Saturday morning, and I was planning on having a lovely morning, reading the newspapers in bed, whilst drinking a cup of coffee. And I woke up and I was feeling very refreshed because I'd slept well, and I'd made some coffee with. I'd made some special coffee. I'd gone out and bought EDI coffee so that I'd have a proper good Saturday morning. So I was sitting there with my cup of coffee in bed, feeling very pleased with myself, when I got bitten by a centipede. Yes.
Wow.
I never thought that would happen. And suddenly, from feeling very calm and looking forward to a morning of reading the newspapers and reading my book and drinking coffee, I was precipitated into worrying about what I needed to do about being bitten by a centipede, and worrying about whether I needed to go to hospital and thinking about the repercussions of that happening. So suddenly, from a very calm state, if you like, if you wanted to describe my mental health on a Saturday morning, from a very calm state, I was suddenly propelled into a very agitated, anxious state. And then I did what most people would do in this situation, had a little Google, and on Google it said, "Don't worry, it stings a bit, but it'll be fine." And that's exactly what I'm experiencing. It's stinging a bit, but it'll be fine. And gradually, if you like, my anxiety lowered and I was able to get back to my cup of coffee, whilst feeling mildly put out, if you like, by the appearance of a centipede. Must be careful not to leave my cardigan on the floor in the future, was the learning point which I got from that, yeah. Because I do believe that when things like that happen to us, a very good way of moving through the difficulty is to try and understand the learning point from that difficulty, if you like. So I hope from the example you can see how I'm trying to describe our mental health as a very fluid process. And our mental health can be better at some times of the day than it is at other times of the day. For example, people who struggle with anxiety can often find themselves ruminating before sleep. So I think knowing, if you like, some of the difficult moments of the day and some of the difficult moments of our lives, some of the things that we find difficult, really helps us to manage our mental health and be aware of our mental health, the things that we find difficult, the things that we fear, can really, really help with maintaining good mental health. Mental health disorders are very, very frequent in the general population. I think as many as 1 in 4 people can be struggling with mental health difficulties at any one time. And all too often we try to hide those difficulties from other people because through the ages, mental health difficulties have often been equated with the idea of weakness, and the absence or the lack of mental health difficulties people can often see as strength. Yeah. And I think that dichotomy that people can fall into also leads into the perpetuation of mental health difficulties as a stigma, as something that is not okay.
Do you find that this the stigmatization of mental health challenges in general was more common in the past, and are we moving forward, or are there those barriers and taboos still very present?
I think it comes back to the point that Giuseppe was making about healthy working environments. I think that given that 1 in 4 people can be struggling at any given time with a mental health difficulty, they're very, very frequent. Yeah, lots of people with mental health difficulties work. Yeah. Mm-hmm. How the mental health difficulty manifests itself in the workspace and how that difficulty is managed within the workspace can be a very important factor for people's life. How it's understood in the workspace and how it's provided for in the workspace, I think are all very important considerations in terms of how much of an impact that person's mental health difficulty has on the workspace and how much of an impact it has on themselves as well.
That's very interesting, and I would like to go back to your Saturday, because actually I had a similar experience on Saturday myself. I wasn't bitten by any insects, but I was very quiet and relaxed and chilled at the beginning of the day, and then I made the mistake of opening my mailbox by accident, actually. And so I started reading the emails, and I started to getting really stressed and really anxious, thinking about all the things that I was supposed to do. And so I completely lost my moment of relaxation, let's say. And at some point, I met with a friend, and he could see that I wasn't okay. And so at some point, I felt the need of explaining why I felt a little bit agitated, but I don't know. I felt some difficulties in explaining what was happening, and in a way, probably because of what you were saying about mental health issues, let's say, feeling as weaknesses, I struggled to open up. in this sense, and at the same time I found myself struggling finding the right words to describe what was happening. And so I was wondering, if you think the language of the way we talk about mental health has an impact on how we consider mental health in lighter but also more serious circumstances. And since you were talking about the workplace as well, how do we talk about mental health in the workplace generally? And are we talking, let's say, the right way, or are we talking at all or enough about mental health in the workplace?
I think that it's very important to talk about mental health in the workplace. If you think about our lives, a day and a night is 24 hours, yes? So you have 8 hours sleeping. That's how much an average adult kind of needs to sleep a night, yeah. Some people sleep 7.5 hours, some people sleep 10 hours, but in general, people need around 8 hours sleep. And then you have 8 hours working, right? So that's a third of our lives, yeah. And then you have 8 hours of other time, yeah. Sure. So if you like, the 8 hours that we spend at work are really, really important, and how our needs are met in the workplace and how we're understood in the workplace, how comfortable we feel in the workplace, all is a part of whether people are understanding of our mental health or mental health difficulties, as the case may be at any given time. But I see mental health as a continuum, and yes, we do need diagnostic criteria, if you like, for particular mental health disorders, but I do believe that we can be on a continuum between mentally healthy and mental health difficulties at any given time. I do believe that one of the cornerstones of good mental health is having clear boundaries between work and out of work. And I think it's really, really good, for example, when professors write at the bottom of their emails, I might answer an email at 2:00 at night or on a Saturday or a Sunday, but I don't expect you to reply. I really like that phrase. Somebody wrote that on an email to me, and I thought that's a very good phrase to have, because I think that all too often we can be overwhelmed by our working lives, and that they can really dominate our thinking and make it hard for us to enjoy experiences out of work. So learning ways of being able to have days free of thinking about work, I think is very important.
I think this is a very good advice also for researchers and thinking about the UI PhD researchers, particularly because what you were saying about setting boundaries can be quite difficult and challenging if you're doing a PhD, which sometimes seems like overlaps with your life really, or your identity or identities even. So I was wondering if you find this happening at the UI with our PhD population and
all the time.
Yeah,
all the time. And I think that particularly when people are feeling very anxious in an academic environment, when people are experiencing, for example, imposter syndrome, or when they don't feel good enough about themselves, that can play out in a number of different ways in terms of how they approach their work and also the work that they take on. So regularly I come across people who totally overload themselves with deadlines and feel very overwhelmed by that experience. And sometimes quite annoyed with me when I suggest that Saturdays and Sundays should be days where you're doing different things, where you're doing things that you enjoy yourself doing. Because I think in academia is increasingly becoming a very competitive environment, and people, you don't have the typical boundaries of a work setting. So working from home or working from a cafe or working on a train is very normal for a lot of our researchers, and therefore I also think that researchers often don't know how much is enough.
True.
And also a little bit on the same theme of the idea of our mental health being fluid, the idea that taking time off can actually enhance our academic work and enhance our creativity, and learning to give our brains the chance to think about what we're studying and what we're researching, and rather than feeling frustrated by not being able to write, or the amount that you need to read before you start writing. But allowing that process to happen, I think, would really, really help with a lot of people's mental health.
This is so important to highlight, because I think most of us can relate with being in a situation of stressing about work or about studies, and not really knowing when to stop, or having difficulties putting boundaries between our personal time and what you said about the thirds of the day. Let's say that we need to dedicate to different things. But when we talk about stress, and
can I just say something about that? Yeah. When you gave me this list of questions, I read through it and I thought, oh my goodness, how on earth am I ever going to to answer these questions? They're really difficult questions, and I don't know whether I'm able to answer these questions. And I thought, oh, well, trust your brain, it'll find a way. Yes. And so I'd read through the questions on Friday, and I was a little bit worried about how to answer them. And then luckily I got bitten by this centipede on Saturday morning, and I thought, oh, this is the perfect answer to one of these questions.
It worked out.
Yeah. So there's a little bit there about trusting your brain to work, giving your brain time to work on things and to let ideas and thoughts mature in a way that then they'll come out. So there's a little bit about trusting your brain in there. Sorry, you were saying.
No, this is so important, and I think it adds to what we all know, but we usually have difficulty maintaining this in the everyday life, which can be chaotic. But usually when we're stressing out and where we are in this day-to-day activity, usually we blame ourselves for all the stress. Usually we have thoughts saying, what's wrong with me, and I cannot keep up with everything, what's wrong with me, and I'm so stressed all the time, what's wrong with me, and I cannot sleep well, or we try to find ways of our body, how can my body overfunction and do more than in one day, that at the hours of the day, or these types of thoughts. I can imagine that they are more common than we admit. But also there's another point of view, which is the more institutional point of view, and focusing more on the environment. So there's the people who are stressed and the people who are struggling, but also there's an organization and a workplace or a study place where these people belong into, and how can this environment be adding more stress into these people's lives. You already mentioned the academia being very competitive, but also different workplaces have different stress levels that they can add into their workers' lives. So how can this environment be adding to people's stress, or even reducing people's stress and being supportive and more healthy for them?
That was one of the tough questions.
I think the first step in that process is acceptance that mental health difficulties aren't a weakness, and that they're far more frequent and pervasive in our society than we really think, and that I also think that it's really important that we come away a little bit from pathologizing feeling in certain ways when certain life events happen. So, for example, if a loved one passes away, we experience grief. And if it's a particularly close loved one, then the grief process can last from between 1 and 4 years. Yeah. If it's not complicated by other factors. And that's normal. That's how our brain works. And if you go and have a look at the grief reaction, if you go and have a look, there are sort of several steps in that reaction, and that's what we all go through. That's very normal, And it doesn't have to be the passing of a loved one. It can be a breakup. It can be a dearly loved animal passing away. It's the absence of something that was. But all too often, we tend to pathologize that and see as, and interpret what we're experiencing as depression, which it does look like. The grief reaction can look like depression in certain circumstances. Or how often do we not take into account that it's going to take us a few days, if we've been traveling, which is a really tiring experience, it's going to take us a few days to get back into our daily routines. We don't take that into account. We just expect ourselves to be as normal. And then get very frustrated when we're feeling tired, or that we're not producing as much as we think that we should be producing in those moments of time. Coming from the idea that we're either mentally well or we're mentally unwell, if you like, also comes the idea that our brains work the same all the time, which is not the case. That we have better days and worse days. And if we all began to learn that about ourselves, then we would lose a layer of expectations that we have towards ourselves. Rather than saying, oh, I've just been on a trip, I've got home, I've got no clean pants because everything in my suitcase is dirty. I've had to cobble together a breakfast because I haven't got any milk in the fridge, and now I'm trying to make do through the day, and then have the expectation that you're going to perform as much as you usually perform. That's going to then lead us into certain places. Whereas recognizing, I've just been on a trip and it's been really difficult this morning because I couldn't find any clean pants, and I haven't had the breakfast that I usually have. I'll still get through my day, but I just need to be careful about the expectations that I place on myself during that day. It leads to us having more awareness of ourselves and perhaps meeting our own expectations more frequently, rather than the trap that a lot of us fall into, which is setting ourselves up to fail because we're not in the right headspace to be doing certain things at certain times.
And also maybe taking off a layer of guilt that can then
Absolutely.
become bigger and bigger and then follow us to the next day.
Yes.
And
I
think it goes back also to what we were saying at the beginning about physical health and mental health. So if you were coming back from a trip with a fever, of course you would take some time to heal, but when it comes to different layers of mental health...
Do we really need to make a difference between physical and mental health? Isn't it part of the same thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If I'm feeling under the weather, then that's going to also play out in my brain feeling under the weather.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
True.
not just my body that's feeling under the weather.
True.
Yeah. So it's going to probably be harder for me to concentrate. It's going to be harder for me to sit still. It's going to be harder for me to stay in places without coughing. And if I've got a cold, for example,
I think this separation of the mind and the body is a Western invention and actually kind of only existing on paper. Maybe if we look at other parts of the world and other culture, other civilizations, they have this inherent connection between the mind and the body. They don't separate it as much as maybe Western society does.
I think you're probably right.
And I think it also goes back, I was also thinking about what you were saying about productivity in the workplace, and maybe we should rethink the way we consider ourselves productive and the way we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And again, both without distinguishing between physical problems or mental health challenges of different degrees, but having a more holistic view on what we can...
People say that the best internal voice to have is stern but kind. Yeah. So all too often when people are talking to me, they misinterpret some of the advice that I give in terms of being, when I advise people to be kind to themselves, people can sometimes think that I'm suggesting that they have long bubble baths with scented candles and eat chocolate, and that's not what I'm suggesting at all. It's not a kindness to yourself to be in bed when you should be somewhere else, unless you're unwell. Yeah. If you're unwell and you're in bed, then that's the right place to be. But if you're not unwell and you're in bed and you should be somewhere else, that's not a kindness to yourself, because in reality what you'll be doing is spoiling the experience of being in bed for yourself, because you're sitting there in bed thinking that you should be somewhere else. That can be quite a trap that people fall into sometimes. So when I'm suggesting being kind towards yourself, I'm not suggesting that people sit around watching daytime television drinking beer. That's not, because it's not kind to yourself to be doing that. But being able to listen to yourself, being able to understand where you're at mentally and physically at any given time, and to be able to set your expectations in terms of how you're feeling on a daily basis, I think is really, really important. Doing what you need to do when you need to do it is really important. For example, one of the traps that I could see researchers falling into regularly is procrastination due to perfectionistic tendencies. So people feel like their written work isn't ever going to meet their own expectations, so they avoid starting to work on their written work. And then what can happen is that the fear of missing the deadline becomes more of a priority than the perfectionistic tendencies. So people will then go into sort of working 24/7 to produce what needs to be produced for the deadline. And then they hand the work in for the deadline, but then people are not satisfied with the work that they've produced. So that then plays into the vicious cycle of avoiding the work in the first place. Yeah.
Right.
So these sorts of tendencies can be playing out for people without any real conscious awareness that this is happening, which can also play into your mental health in a big way.
I think it's a very nice perspective to have when we're taking care of ourselves and taking care of our needs, to say that we're kind to ourselves and not say that, oh, I'm weak, so I'm doing this because I cannot get out of bed today, so I'm staying at bed, I'm weak. Instead of saying, I cannot get up today, I will be kind to myself and I will fulfill my needs and I will try to find the way that I can support myself better. But when does the struggle become so big that we can no longer support just ourselves and we need to seek external support, go to therapy or seek different kinds of support and advice for us?
That's a really interesting question. I would really like to see people using psychologists and psychotherapists like they use hairdressers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would really like it that people come and talk about situations before they become mental health difficulties. When you, from a psychological perspective, when you catch a psychological difficulty as early as possible, it's much, much easier to work on than it is if it has been ingrained in somebody's way of thinking and behaviour for years and years and years and years. Equally, if a way of thinking or a behaviour has been ingrained in somebody for years and years and years and years, if people recognise that that's something that they would like to change, it takes a long time. Mm. Yeah.
Yes.
And you change things one thought at a time. Mm. If you can catch that thought. Yeah. Mm. And so people being patient with themselves and appreciating where they're at in life, appreciating the things that they would like to change, and taking a kind approach to changing those things over the course of time, I think is very, very important. And it comes away from the idea of sort of instant gratification and achievement and this is something I have to change now, and which can sometimes be some of the things that people bring to the sessions that they have with me. This intolerance towards themselves of some of the ways that they feel, or perhaps the perception that some of the things that they do are a weakness.
It's nice to think about seeking support and doing therapy as a part of maintaining yourself, the same way you would get a haircut. It's a nice way of thinking about it, because I think it takes some of the pressure of doing something huge, because some people they don't view it the same way as you would do any other activity of taking care of your body and your mind the same way. Going into something a bit different but also related to that, I'm wondering how can this support and this also therapy and that mental health professional, seeking a mental health professional for support, can this be different for people with different characteristics? Meaning, of course, it's very personal. Each person experiences their mental health in a very personal way, but also can some characteristics like being part of the LGBT plus community, being a woman, being someone with an economical disadvantage, those types of characteristics, can they influence the way you seek for help and also the help that is available for you?
Yes, of course. I mean, when we're talking about kind of mental health difficulties and intersectionality, of course, there's a lot of research to suggest that certain groups of people struggle more than other groups of people, and certain groups of people are at a disadvantage compared to other groups of people. So the choice of having a child for a woman in academia is a really, really hard one, because women are under a certain time pressure to have children, but in the early stages of an academic career, I think it's very hard to identify, in inverted commas, the right time to have a child. And many of the women that I've worked with feel that they're going to be putting themselves at a disadvantage compared to their male colleagues taking the time out to have a child. So yes, I do think that with respect to the LGBTQIA plus population, that's a whole kind of kettle of fish in itself. But I do think that if you grow up in a very heteronormative culture, then you do have to put a lot of work into feeling on a level playing field.
Yes.
Yeah. Which then can play out in a number of ways in terms of mental health and mental health difficulties. Not to mention some of I'm going to try hard to say this without seeming stereotypical, if you like, but how people relate to their sexuality and to their gender can also play an important part in how they feel about themselves more generally, how they present themselves, how they present their work. And that can also have an impact, if you like, on the decisions that they take, the decisions that we take, not they take, that we take in life, etc., etc. So, yes.
We are in intersection of our different identities, after all.
Yes, but certain people's identities are easier to live with than other people's identities.
Yeah,
sure.
And, whilst being a woman, I realised that I come from a very privileged white background. Yeah. Which probably gives me a sense of entitlement which other people wouldn't experience. And I think that's really important to note.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we go back again to trying to remove those barriers also for people with different characteristics, especially if you
Absolutely.
want them to be healthier in
Yeah.
their work environment and feel safe, and then thinking with a business mind perspective, which I don't necessarily like, but they can also be more productive if what you're looking for is productivity, which I don't think it's the only thing we should look about. But since this is the language, that we're often caught in conversations, so you need to think also about people's lives, experiences, identities, and their well-being if you want to achieve that, if that's your goal. But that's a very big topic, another one of our big questions. Actually, I think you already gave us a lot of, and the listeners, a lot of tips and a lot of advice about how to treat ourselves kindly in a way. But I wanted to pick up...
and our thinking.
And exactly. All
too often do we have highly critical internal thoughts. Oh, you're so stupid to have got upset about being stung by a centipede. Yeah. You completely ruined your Saturday morning cup of coffee because... So that's me placing an expectation on myself that I should stay calm when a completely foreign creature has just bitten me. Yeah. Or stung me. I don't think they can bite you. I think they sting you. Well, that's what Google says anyway. Yeah. So all too often are we judgmental about our thinking and what we should be thinking and what we shouldn't be thinking in any given situation. Which can often, if you like, come from the societies that we're in. Yeah. So the society that we're in is all about productivity. And one of the first studies in the 1920s, I think, was the Hawthorne effect, where they were looking at productivity in a light bulb factory and found that just by asking the workers, do you enjoy working here, their productivity increased. So, yeah.
Wow.
So just by being interested, if you like, in the individual, I think is an important part of feeling held in the workspace. And given that we dedicate a third of our lives to the workspace, it's important to feel held in the workspace. I think it's really important to, for example, say, for example, your child is sick. Yeah. It's very important that you feel able to say to your workspace, today my child is sick, without fear of there being of you being punished within the workspace for staying at home and looking after your child.
Right.
So being there for each other's needs the same way we are there for our needs.
Yeah. Yeah. Whilst being mindful, I mean, the flip side of what we're talking about is malingering, pretending that we're sick when we're not sick, etc., which isn't a kindness to ourselves. Yeah, it's say I think, today I don't fancy going to work. I'm going to ring my boss and pretend that I'm sick. Yeah. Well, I'm going to sit in bed feeling absolutely terrible about myself all day because I've lied to my boss, I've stolen from my workplace, I've done a series of things which don't make me feel good about myself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So kind but stern.
Right. It seems to me like a good place where to end our episode, but we usually ask our guests if they have any recommendations in terms of books or podcasts they listen to or TV series they watch that they would like to share with our elephants in the room, let's say, and what listen to us, linked with this episode, or even you can go wild and suggest any... things that interest you lately.
Okay. So RuPaul's Drag Race.
Oh, wow. I love that.
RuPaul's Drag Race is just the most beautiful thing because on the first episode, you have these wonderful drag queens arriving from different corners of the world and all feeling very anxious and nervous and not sure about themselves. And RuPaul says, if you can't love yourself, how the hell can you love anybody else? Yeah. And when I first heard him say this, I thought, that's a bit narcissistic, isn't it? That's a bit out there. But over the course of time and watching the series as a whole and watching people gradually be comfortable with themselves is a beautiful thing to watch, and owning their drag queenness, and enjoying themselves as drag queens over the course of the series. I think you can look at that process and you can equate it to our first year researchers coming in, feeling like imposters, feeling like they came to the EUI by accident, and feeling like somehow, somewhere, someone's made a mistake, and that they have to work really, really hard to hide that from everybody else. Yeah. And gradually over the course of time, learning to sort of own their inner academic and their inner researcher. I think there's a lot of similarities between the two processes. So
thank you so much, because I will never watch it the same way again after this.
And let's put RuPaul in all our CVs for our PhD researchers.
Exactly.
Curriculum. All right, so thank you, Gemma, so much. That was a very interesting episode. It was so nice to chat with you, and thank you, Christina, for joining us with the questions and the discussion. That was very lovely, and so I wish all our listeners a very good day, and as you know, you can listen to the episode in all the main platforms, YouTube for sure, and on Radio Cavolo as well. And thank you, Radio Cavolo, for hosting us as every time in a very wonderful way. So thank you.